Car Chronicles. How are you guys doing? You guys ready? What is narcissist supply? Part 1. You guys ready? In order to understand narcissist supply, you have to understand narcissist fuel. A narcissist operates off of fuel on a daily basis. They need it. They have to have it. Let's look at it from this perspective. Let's look at it from the perspective of like an individual that is insulin dependent. They may be diabetic and they're insulin dependent. Their body cannot produce or break down sugars. And what happens is if the sugar starts going down in the system, this is usually in the normal person, the body kind of fluctuates and regulates and lets you know you're hungry. Well, for a person that has diabetes, when their sugar begins to drop, they may become lethargic. They may become confused. Their speech may be slurred, or they may go into a diabetic coma, and they can die if the blood sugar goes down too low. So they have to eat protein in order to bring the blood sugar back up. Okay, let's look at that from that perspective. Fuel for a narcissist is a pathological or excessive need for attention or admiration. A narcissist has to have attention and admiration. A narcissist has a very low self-esteem, a very low self-worth, and they have a very, very fragile ego. For some of you, you may be thinking they don't look like they have a low self-esteem. They don't act like it. Well, you have to remember that a narcissist creates a facade, a persona, and they hype themselves up. So they're grandiose. They're very arrogant. They look like they're smart. They have everything, the way that they dress, especially somatic, how they dress, what they drive, who they connect with, all blows up their ego to get them attention. They have to have attention. If they don't have attention, or if you cut off narcissistic fuel for a long period of time, then what happens is you'll notice that they'll have like psychiatric breakdowns, or some of them have even become actually suicidal. So fuel for a narcissist regulates them on a daily basis. They're willing to take negative or positive fuel, which comes from supplies reactions. So if they don't get the admiration, or when you first meet that narcissist during that love bombing, they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. You admire them, you worship them. Oh my gosh, they're the best thing, and they need that from you. They need to hear that. When you stop giving it to them, usually when you figure out who they are, they begin to lose that fuel, that energy that you're giving them. So they have to go look for fuel through many different sources. And those sources are called supply. Supply is like a gas station. People are supplied or pumps to provide them with reactions, to provide them with fuel. On the inside of a narcissist, they already feel weak, they feel unstable, they feel unworthy, and so they get empowered when they can cause other people to react. Car Chronicles. What is supply? Part 2. So let's focus on the primary source of supply. What is the primary source of supply? A narcissist usually has a primary source of supply, which could be a partner, husband, wife, children, whoever that primary person is in their life that supplies them with some type of homeostasis or normality within the public eye. Primary sources of supply are those that release copious amounts of fuel to this narcissist. These are the ones that are usually the most abused out of all supply and people around them. During that hunting stage, or during that love bombing stage, that narcissist has tested and tried that primary supply before they became primary supply, because a primary supply is capable of handling a large amount or a high amount of abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse. And usually they have been tested and tried to see whether they can handle the type of abuse that narcissist is going to release. Verbally, emotionally, can they handle the weight of this amount of abuse that I'm going to put on this person? A narcissist knows that a primary source of supply usually is not going to go anywhere until they wake up, but they know that they're more, in their mind, they're permanent, and that they're not going to jump up and just leave them. They're going to stay. It's easy to love bomb them. They're naive. They were naive in the very beginning, but usually the primary supply they know is a permanent fixture in their life and is not going to go anywhere. Like I said, unless they wake up, but they're not going to go anywhere. They're confident that it doesn't matter what they do, doesn't matter how many times they cheat, doesn't matter how many times they beat them, abuse them, but they know that primary source of supply is not going anywhere. They're locked in. that primary source of supply also provides them with their image. If they're a somatic and they have to have an appearance, they provide them with the appearance. They provide them with the house and all the fixings they go along with the house. The children, they provide them their status and their image within the public eye. The primary source of supply is the most abused and the greatest flying monkey, and we'll talk about that later, that a narcissist will have. Even as they're out getting fuel from other venues or other areas, they always come back to home base. Home base is that primary source of supply. So if someone has caused a narcissistic injury, if they were love bombing someone else, if they ghosted their own primary source supply, they know that if it doesn't work and they can't pull in another supply, they always go back to home base. And some people that were primary source supply have been there 40, 50 years. The narcissist is very confident that that primary source supply is not going anywhere. Chronicles Part 3. What is supply? Now let's talk about the secondary sources of supply. Always remember this. A narcissist is never addicted to the sources of supply. They are addicted to the fuel that's released by the supply. That's why people are irrelevant to them. The only relevance that a person has is what they can offer, the amount of fuel that they can offer, which makes them stay a little longer. But a narcissist is a big, empty pit, a hole that no matter how much you try to fill them up, no matter what you do to try to please them, appease them, worship the ground they walk on, admire them, whatever they tell you, it's because of you, because of you. They're always on the hunt for more supply. They always crave more and more and more. It's obsessive. They have to have fuel. So what happens is there is secondary supply. Secondary supply can be a side chick, a side dude, and then for a lot of cerebrals, not all narcissists cheat, believe it or not, but they're going to find a secondary source of supply to fuel them, because with that primary source of supply, that primary source of supply is giving out copious amounts of fuel, and they're not getting anything back in return until they get through the devaluation, the discard, and going back to the idealization stage. When they get to the idealization stage, that's when the narcissist releases fuel to give them their hit, and then they just go back into their cycle. But they're always looking for secondary supply, and those that when they're looking for secondary supply, you'll notice that you may have been ghosted, you have no contact, they leave home for a few hours, a few days, and some of them that actually won't leave home for a whole day, meaning like overnight. They'll leave home during the day, but they're always looking for sources of supply. It may not just be one, it may be several sources of supply, but always remember that they have to release fuel in order to pull the new supply in. And when they release fuel, it empties out their tank to a certain extent. They may be at half a tank. And when they're at half a tank, they have to go to another supply or primary supply or another supply to fill themselves up. If they get too empty, they go straight to the primary supply and they pull on that supply. That's why I did a video where you can see when the fuel levels are low. Go look for that video. When the fuel levels are low, you can see it in the primary source supply's face. They look haggard, they look drained, they look depressed. But then when that narcissist comes back and fills them up with some fuel because they're love bombing, they look vibrant, they look happy. And you can tell when the narcissist is low on fuel because they look haggard, depressed, they look terrible, horrible. And you can tell because they need to go and get some supply. Secondary supply, usually other people, they pull them into their little circle. Secondary supply. Short. Chronicles. What is supply? Part 4. Now you have the third, called tertiary. Yeah, that one. Tertiary supply. Remember the primary source and the secondary source. The secondary source of supply is always in the running to replace the primary. So it doesn't matter how much that narcissist has with that primary source. They're always weighing the option of, does the secondary source of supply have more than the primary? And they're willing to take their chances and risk if the secondary has more than the primary and they can replace it. So the secondary is always in a position to replace. They're in a resume, in interrogation state to see whether or not they can handle the weight of the trauma and if they have more to offer than the primary. So they always are searching for a replacement source of supply. However, the tertiary source of supply, check this out. doesn't have a lot of relevance to the narcissist. A tertiary source supply is one that they may go into a restaurant and they say, hey, handsome, hey, beautiful. That is a source supply. One to pull up at a light and they flick you off. That is tertiary source supply. You go somewhere and they're complimenting their child and, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was your child. I didn't know that your child was a doctor or a football player. Oh my gosh, you are a great parent. They need that as well. But a tertiary source supply will never be in a position of secondary or primary source supply. They're not looking at tertiary supply as a replacement. This is just the fuel that they get throughout the day. Hey, handsome. Hey, beautiful. Oh my gosh, I didn't know this is your child. Oh my gosh, you're a great parent. Oh, you own your own business. Oh my gosh, you work so and so. Oh my gosh, I need to come over and talk to you sometimes. I need to replace my plan. You know what? I noticed that your car warranty is running out and it's time for you to renew your warranty. So I know you got the deal. Tertiary. That's a joke, but that's tertiary. So the tertiary supply is not relevant to a point where they'll ever replace a primary or a primary at that. Tertiary is just a little fuel that they get throughout the day to maintain. It's the little hit. It's like the little hit of crack, the little hit of a drug that they get throughout the day to maintain them, to make them feel relevant. And they may come around just to get that little compliment. Oh, that's my girl. She works over at Starbucks and she takes care of me. Or, that's my girl. She always makes my plate and everything. But their mindset is never to pursue the tertiary. They give them a little compliments too. Play with them a little bit, but that tertiary is never in the running to replace a primary source supply. The secondary source supply is always in the running to take place of the primary, and the primary doesn't even know it. Most primary think he's not going anywhere, she's not going anywhere. No, you're always replaceable to a narcissist. You are a number. Like in the military, you're a number and you are replaceable. Supply.